Hello, you're watching the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is our daily combat update from the Ukrainian front line. The fighting continues, and we keep closely tracking and analyzing the situation along the line of contact. So friends, today's episode will be very packed, because there's truly a lot of news coming in from the front, unusually a lot compared to the past few weeks. A large number of advances have been recorded across different sectors, and not only on the Russian side. Ukraine's armed forces have also had some successes, although, of course, their scale is far smaller. So without wasting time, let's get straight into the breakdown. We'll start today with the northern sector, in the Sumi region. Here, Russian forces have opened up a new point of entry and managed to advance along a front roughly 6.5 kilometers wide. As a result, they were able to quickly take the border settlement of Komarovka and also clear forested areas on the flanks. From the east, they cleared part of the Mikhail tract, while from the west, they took control of the Drogobich tract, along with a forest belt adjacent to the Lochnia River. What can be said about this sector? For the Ukrainian armed forces, it is yet another pressure point. This is not about a large-scale offensive, but rather the creation of a new area of pressure designed to force Ukrainian troops to react and redeploy resources. That's why I personally don't expect anything major here. Most likely, Russian units will keep pressing forward gradually, expanding their control both deeper, toward Kulanovo, and along the flanks. Next, we move to the main Sumi bridgehead. Here, the North Group has also made progress. From Alexeyevka, they managed to move forward about 1 kilometer along forest belts. The direction of movement is toward the settlements of Korchakovka, Mala Korchakovka, and Nova Sich. In addition, near Andreyevka, Russian units slightly expanded control along the tree lines. Yes, there are no rapid offensive tempos here, and realistically, there can't be. As I've said before, the main forces were pulled from this area and redeployed to other, more important sectors. But there's an interesting point. Ukraine's armed forces are barely able to achieve anything here anymore. In the Sumi region, Ukrainian troops are essentially continuing to retreat. Their last notable advance dates back to September, meaning that for several months in a row, they have been falling back here rather than conducting any offensive actions. There is also a third sector in the Sumi region where Russian forces managed to advance, a new bridgehead near Harabovski. And I have footage from this area showing Ukrainian soldiers being taken out in a trench. What has Russia achieved here? They began moving from Harabovski toward Ryazna. The advance exceeded 1 kilometer, with Russian units pushing into forested areas. Of course, there is an obstacle on this route, the Kurova River, but this is not a river on the scale of the Siversky Donets. It's more like a small water barrier, almost a stream. So it's unlikely to hold Russian forces back for long. Overall, Ukrainian positions here are being pushed back. We'll keep watching how the situation develops, and now we move on to the Kharkiv region. In the Kharkiv region, Ukraine's forces also have plenty of problems. Let's start with the Vovchansk sector. Fighters from the North Group managed to shift the front slightly in an area that had remained almost unchanged for over a year, near the village of Zaparisia. Russian units advanced about 600 meters and took the central part of the settlement. In addition, from recently captured Prylipka, they began moving south along the Siversky Donets River and reached the northern outskirts of the village of Hravska. They have not entered the settlement yet, but Russian positions are now literally about 200 meters from the edge. Given the current frontline configuration, Ukrainian forces will not be able to hold this area for long. This is especially true because farther south, Ukrainian positions are also gradually weakening. For example, from the Lyman side, Russian troops advanced and entered the village of Simonivka. Fighting is still ongoing inside the settlement. If Simonivka is eventually pushed through, as you can clearly see on the map, this would open a route into the rear of the Ukrainian garrison in Hravska. That's exactly why I'm saying, under the current frontline layout, it will be extremely difficult for them to hold those positions for long. What else happened in the Vovchansk sector? A pocket between Lyman and Vilcha was closed. At the same time, it has not yet been possible to push the line of contact away from Vilcha itself. Ukrainian forces regularly launch assaults and attempt to regain lost positions. There was also a small advance in the area of the Vovchansk hamlets, where a complex of farm buildings was taken. The fighting here is heavy, roughly on the same level as it was in Vovchansk itself. In other words, it's not possible to break through Ukraine's defenses quickly here. However, gradually, step by step, house by house, and building by building, Russian troops continue to move forward. Now to the Olshani bridgehead. Progress has been recorded here as well. Fighters from the North Group managed to advance south of Ambanoy, and the advance was quite significant, nearly 2 kilometers, or about 1.8 kilometers to be precise. The direction of movement is toward Hrihorivka, and from the current positions, the distance to the village is roughly 2.5 kilometers. Slightly farther south, a pocket was closed near Dvorichanske. In addition, along a broad section about 4.5 kilometers wide, Russian troops advanced from the highway toward Novovasilivka. The distance to the village is now less than 2 kilometers, while just a day ago it was around 4. In the area of Fiholivka, positions were also slightly improved, but control over Dolhenka was lost. As I've said, it's not only the Russian army that is making gains. Here, a Ukrainian counterattack succeeded, and Russian units had to pull back by roughly 2.5 kilometers. At the same time, Russian forces finally managed to push the line of contact away from Dvorichna and also regained positions south of Zakidne that had been lost back in December. If you remember, Ukrainian forces launched a breakthrough attempt there in December. I told you about it at the time. They managed to entrench themselves at a pumping station, but now they have been driven out, and those positions have returned under Russian control. Overall, we can see that Russian forces are now trying to strengthen their flanks. It looks like they are learning from past mistakes. We have discussed the Kupansk situation many times. It is largely a problem of flanks and logistics. Now, as we can see, they have indeed started working on strengthening those flanks, but so far it is still not enough. To make the flanks truly secure and to stabilize logistics, they need at minimum to hold the line of Velika Shapkivka to Monachynivka. That is the bare minimum. Ideally, they would need to establish positions even farther west. But for now, it is what it is. And that is why the situation around Kupiansk remains extremely difficult. We have now received an update on Kupiansk, on what the line of contact looks like on the right bank of the city. The most important point is that the Yubileni district was abandoned and control over it was lost, because there was a real threat of Russian units being encircled there. As we have discussed before, sometimes it is better to pull back than to end up surrounded. On the Russian side, control over the automotive transport college has been restored. However, control over the private housing sector near Polovaya and Uyutnaya streets has been lost. At the same time, Russian forces established control over the migration service building, which had served as a fortified Ukrainian position. But despite that, control over an entire block of high-rise buildings was lost. Along with this, control over the northern part of the right bank area of Kupiansk has been restored, and control has also been established over the forest belts north of Moskovka. The bottom line is this. If we look purely at the numbers, Russian forces gained more ground thanks to advances along the tree lines near Moskovka. But if we talk strictly about the city itself and the urban area, it is clear that Ukraine's forces have had more success there. Yes, the city has still not been lost by Russian forces, despite a month and a half of intense fighting and constant Ukrainian assaults. But the situation remains difficult and will likely stay that way until the flanks are secured, and with them, proper logistics to the right bank. Moving on. Russian media outlets are running loud headlines claiming that Isum is falling, that brigades are moving into an offensive, and that Kyiv is facing serious problems not only in the energy sector, but also directly along the line of contact. And let's shift our focus to Izum for just a moment. As you know, Izum is located here, on the Krnoliman direction, where Russian units are indeed trying to press against Ukraine's defenses. However, no real advances specifically toward Izum have been recorded so far. In fact, if you look at the map, Izum is still quite far away, yet pro-Russian sources are already spreading these claims. Now let's move to the Krnoliman sector itself, where new reports are coming in and where fairly serious changes have been observed. We'll start with the southern part of this area. Today, what can be described as a real map update has taken place. Confirmation has finally appeared. Earlier, I told you that pro-Russian sources had been coloring this territory as if it had already come under Russian control, but for a long time there was no supporting evidence from that area. Now that confirmation has arrived, the section of the line of contact that I marked in red is currently fully under the control of the Russian armed forces, and this entire area is now effectively confirmed as being controlled by the Russian side. There are also reports that the settlement of Ozanoy is already almost under Russian control, but so far there is no objective footage confirming full and final control over the village. At the same time, the Russian Ministry of Defense has not officially announced that either Ozanoye or Dibrovo has come under Russian control, despite the fact that multiple videos have already been received from Dibrovo, filmed at different points inside the settlement. Still, as of now, the map looks exactly like this. It's possible that tomorrow or the day after, we will see an expansion of the control zone and the final transfer of Ozanoye under full Russian control. A similar situation applies to Dibrovo. 2 fresh videos have come in from there, and earlier footage also arrived from these locations where forward Russian positions were recorded. Based on this, it can be assumed that a significant part of Dibrovo is already under Russian control, and it's even possible that by the time those videos were recorded, the settlement had already fully transitioned under Russian control. But despite the fact that many people in the comments say things like, "The news is already out there, why aren't you updating the map?" I always emphasize the same point. I only make changes once confirming evidence appears. So there's no reason to rush. As soon as we get objective confirmation, I update everything immediately and report it to you. If someone wants to stay ahead of events, they can follow other sources, where, according to them, half of Lyman is already under Russian control. Most of Drobyshev and Stavki have been taken, and Russian troops supposedly advanced south of Dibrovo and Ozanoye. But there is still no confirmed evidence from those areas. The same applies to Bohorodikne. Footage came from there showing Russian forces destroying a pontoon crossing, but an expansion of the control zone around Sviatohirsk has still not been recorded. At the same time, reports continue to appear, claiming that Russian troops are pressing Ukrainian defenses inside Sviatohirsk itself, and also in the area of Sosnov. Moreover, videos have been received showing Russian units consolidating in the central part of Sosnov, but no further advance or confirmed expansion of control has been recorded there so far. Let me remind you that the key settlements in this area are Sosnova and Sviatohirsk. If they are taken, Russian forces will be able to reach the forested areas where it will be much easier to dig in, and pushing them out of those forests would be extremely difficult. In addition, there is a possibility that Russian units will attempt to cross the Siversky Donets River and move toward Bohorodikne, as well as toward the area of the settlement of Dolina. An important supply road toward Sloviansk runs through this area. As I have said before, Russian sources are making statements that Isum is already under attack. But if we look at the situation objectively, Isum, as you can see, is still very, very far away. So let's not rush and jump ahead, and instead continue to follow only confirmed and reliable information. However, there are changes on the Alexandrika direction as well. Russian forces managed to take control of the southeastern part of Zakotne. Yes, there were reports that the village is fully under Russian control, but there are still questions regarding the northwestern part. No objective control footage has been provided from there. That is why the map still shows no new markings at this time. On the Kostiantynivka direction, Russian units cleared the entire shoreline of the Klebanbek reservoir. In other words, full Russian control has now been established around the perimeter of the reservoir, both from the north and from the south. Control zones were also slightly expanded around settlements such as Berestokh, Ilinivka and Stepanivka. And I want to emphasize this separately. Stepanivka is an extremely important settlement because it is located on high ground. If Russian forces manage to firmly secure it, further movement in the areas of Ilinivka and Berestokh will become much easier. And the final sector where advances have been confirmed by objective footage is the Zaparisia region. There, fighters from the Vostok group crossed the Haichur River at another point and took the settlement of Olena Kostiantynivka. As a result, the Haichur has now been crossed almost everywhere, except for the area near the village of Pryluka. But as they say, I'll tell you a little secret. According to information from the guys on the ground, footage will soon come in from there as well. which means we can summarize that the Haichur defensive line of the Ukrainian armed forces has been breached along its entire length. If we summarize the overall results of the past 24 hours, the picture looks like this. One settlement and roughly 6.5 square kilometers of territory came under Ukrainian control, while two settlements and about 60.2 square kilometers of territory came under Russian control. So despite the certain problems around Kupansk, which are real and pointless to deny, across all other front sectors, the Russian army is advancing while Ukrainian forces are retreating. This is clearly reflected in the numbers, roughly 6 square kilometers versus 60 in Russia's favor. That's all I have for today regarding the situation on the front.